What's up, everybody, and welcome back to TarHeelIllustrated.com. Or, of course, if you're watching on our growing YouTube channel, Tar Heel Illustrated, I'm THI staff writer Jacob Turner, and joining me, as he always does, our very own publisher, Andrew Jones. And Andrew, we're here to cap off our UNC basketball look-ahead series. For those that don't know, I know a lot of people on this YouTube channel have been following along, but we've been running out 3 items per week. On the 10 returning players, well, I should say 7 returning players that played significant minutes last year, and the 3 transfers that have come in, doing a look ahead at the player. We've been doing 5 best games, and we've been doing, of course, the ISO videos on those individual players. And if you haven't seen those, you can go check those out on our website, TarHeelIllustrated.com. And guys, real quickly, it's a great time to sign up over there. You can get premium access to our premium content for just $8.33 a month. So much of what we do is premium, and you have to be signed up to do it. So if you want to get a little bit more of a UNC football and basketball fix, and especially with recruiting going on right now, a great time to do that. Link in the description below. You can sign up for just $8.33 a month. But like I said, AJ, in this video, we're going to be kind of culminating and looking and talking about the players that we have been doing the ISO series on since the first week of May. It's been a long time. We've definitely been grinding on this for a while, all summer, really. So looking forward to this one. And as we always do, let's dive into it. So like I mentioned earlier, 7 returning players from last year's team that played significant minutes. I'm throwing Puff Johnson into the mix as well. I know he got hurt and missed it through injury, but we did ISOs on those 7 players. And obviously Dawson Garcia, Brady Manick, and Justin McCoy have all came in as well. So now that the roster has been finalized, we kind of know what the team's going to look like ahead of the season in terms of personnel. A lot to talk about. And I think from a Carolina fan's perspective as well, a lot to be excited about when you consider some of the guys that are returning and the additions that have come in. I think this Carolina basketball roster has shaped up nicely, and Hubert Davis and his staff have done a fantastic job of what they've been able to do.
Of the 10 kids, the 7 coming back for Carolina that play, and let's go over them very quickly. Caleb Love, R.J. Davis, Leaky Black, Kerwin Walton, Armando Bacot, Puff Johnson, and Anthony Harris. 6 of those 7, and of the 3 incoming kids, all 3 of them, meaning 9 of the 10 kids, had significant roles in leading their teams to a victory at some point last year.
Yep.
Anthony Harris did in the NC State game at home, nearly did in his first game back when they went to FSU and they were kind of slogging through, and Roy just said, get in the game.
Yeah,
first
whatever,
game that season. He jumped on the exercise bike, rode hard for 2 minutes, went in the game, and actually helped the Tar Heels make a push at Florida State. Justin McCoy, if you look at some of his big performances at Virginia, they came in the second halves of games, maybe when Jay Huff was in foul trouble or they needed a little bit of energy, which he used to provide. Tony Bennett spoke a lot about that. He inserted Justin McCoy, and boom, he gave them a little bit of a juice injection and helped the Cavaliers get a victory, including and they win at Louisville, which gave them the outright regular season ACC title. So all these guys have helped at certain moments. They have all kind of stepped forward and said, okay, hop on here, whether it was for a couple of minutes if you're McCoy, or whether it was for a whole game if you're Garcia, or if you're Manick, or if you're Bacot, or if you're Love, or if you're Davis, Kerwin Walton. They've all had huge moments. So North Carolina goes into this season, they're still a few months away, but if you're a Carolina fan, you think basketball probably 365 a year. So if you want to ponder about this team having guys that could step up and embrace the moment, they have those guys. And just imagine, they're all going to be a year older. They're all going to be a little bit more fortified. They're all going to be smarter. And now together, they're all preparing in the off season, which nobody had last year, basically. And they're doing so knowing that they've all had these moments, knowing that there's a lot of respect across the board for one another. So there's trust and there's belief. And I think that without breaking things down into little bits, as we will do much more as we get closer to the season, I think that Carolina fans should be very, very excited that they have a lot of been there, done that guys on this roster. And to go from the 325th most experienced team in the country to this is a sizable jump. Yeah. And I think that you will see a sizable jump in the overall performance of the Tar Heels this season.
Definitely. Let's focus on Armando Bacot and Caleb Love to start out. And the reason I say that is Bacot led the team in points last year, 12.3 points per game, and rebounds, 7.8 rebounds per, and you can also throw blocks in there if you want, led the team in that, only had 0.9. Then you look at Caleb Love, 10.5 points per game, second on the team, 3.6 assists, which was a high for the team, and 2.6 rebounds. I know obviously there was Bacot went and tested the waters. We've been saying it since day one that happened, that he was, never seriously actually going to go in the NBA draft. We all expected him to come back. Then you've got a guy like Caleb Love, who I guess early on there was some rumors about him potentially transferring when everything happened, but never in doubt, never really something we ever thought was going to happen. Looking at those two guys in particular, when you look at how important they were to last year's team, Caleb Love still averaged about 11 points per game and, really struggled shooting the ball for a majority of the season. And we saw big leaps and bounds of improvement from Armando Bacot from his freshman year to his sophomore season, and really started to come on and be arguably, I don't even think it's arguable, I think he was Carolina's best player and definitely their most consistent player when you look at just how successful he was. So focusing on those two players first, and then we'll move on, how important are those guys to this year's team? Because I think both of those guys have the ability to improve and get even better from what they are last year, in particular, Caleb Love.
Well, a lot of people with Caleb are going to focus on the turnovers, and that's certainly something that has to be cleaned up. And I think the last several months, he has been in a mission to clean a lot of that up. It'll help if he makes better decisions, because when you make better decisions, if you physically can make the plays, you'll make more positive plays. I also think the way the Tar Heels are going to play with a little bit more spread out. A lot of his turnovers last year were driving in the lane and losing the ball because it's like a mosh pit of skyscrapers in there. So I think a lot of that's going to help him turn in a cleaner performance. But let's remember, he played better late. Shooting percentage wasn't that great late, but he averaged almost 12.5 points a game over the last month or so of the season. And if you go into late January to the end of February, he had 4 7-assist games in that stretch. He was dishing the ball more. Roy Williams talked a lot late in the season. I remember asking him a question, I think it was in the pre-Florida State press conference the day before, about Caleb's game management. And he said, yeah, it's really gotten better. He's a lot more aware where his teammates are. He's trusting himself with certain kinds of passes a little bit more. He's simplifying the game more. You don't have to do wizardry all the time. You can just make the smart play, and it's the best play, the cleanest, most efficient, quickest play. And he was learning a lot of those things. So his game was on this trajectory when the season ended. Armando averaged to 16.3 points a game in the postseason.
Yeah, he was big time.
And if you remember the Florida State game, he was having trouble getting looks down low against Florida State. And Carolina made a nice little push in the second half. Do you remember what Armando did with some of his buckets? He got the ball around the free throw line, put that sucker on the floor, and got to the rim. What did he do in the second half against Wisconsin? Carolina sucked in the first half of that game. They were terrible, okay? Ron would have told you the same thing.
100%.
I'm sitting there in Purdue's arena watching the game, and I'm looking down at North Carolina saying, I've seen this team look like this a few times, but I've seen them look play with a lot more vitality. They didn't really have a lot of vitality, but the second half, one guy came out with tremendous vitality. It was Armando. What did he do? He put the ball on the floor, and he got to the bucket. So I think the way the season closed for both of those guys, they had plenty of personal good vibes to carry into the offseason. And then you throw on top of it some of the stuff that Hubert has said about Armando, hey, ACC Player of the Year. Hubert's not shying away from putting a little bit of pressure on him. And I think that that's wise, because perhaps it kicks even a little bit more of the work into the offseason for Armando. Everything we're hearing about both kids has been extremely positive. Everything we're hearing is that not only are they refining elements of their game that needed refining, especially Caleb, because I think Armando was far more efficient last year, but they're adding to it. Armando needs to be able to step away and hit that 15-foot jumper, use a dribble, get yourself a little separation, shoot the thing, or just catch and shoot. He's got a guy like Brady Manick he's been able to watch for a few months, who is an amazing catch and shoot guy. So you can learn from your teammates, and that will make Armando even better. That will help make him a better NBA prospect. So I think both of them are going to have outstanding years. I think from basically everything that I've heard, they're having terrific off seasons. If you look at some of the clips that Carolina puts out from the scrimmaging that they're doing and stuff like that, Caleb's got an NBA guy on him, or a near NBA guy, all the time.
Yeah.
He's got Marcus Page on him. He's got Theo on him. He's got all these guys there. So he's learning. He's getting better. They're not going to let up at all. They're going to push those guys. because when they were in college, the older dudes that came back pushed them and made them better too. So Carolina fans should feel very, very good about starting the team with those two guys, and there are a lot of other parts as well.
Definitely. I'm going to add something real quick on Caleb Love in particular. I'm glad you mentioned those videos that Carolina putting out, because that's what I wanted to talk about. If you look at the Hubert Davis mic'd up video and you look at the Theo Pinson video as well, they had Theo mic'd up in a scrimmage they were doing. And one of the things I noticed about that Hubert Davis, I think it was a 5-minute video, is every time Caleb did something good, he was very, very encouraging with Caleb. And I think he even singled Caleb out when he was talking to everybody and said something about getting him the ball or something like that. But you could tell every time that Caleb had the ball, did something good, you could see Hubert trying to build that confidence and encourage him, which I think is huge for him. And I noticed the same thing in the Theo video as well. And I had to go back and watch it, but there's a couple of times where Caleb makes some really nice plays and does some nice things. And you can hear Theo just like, yeah, man, that was great. Like, just encouraging him. And I think that's really good, because I think not only does Hubert know how good he is, and not only does Theo know how good he can be, I think that encouragement is trying to, continue to build that confidence back up, because, there was times last year where you could tell just from Caleb being on the court that he wasn't a confident guy when it came to shooting, especially. So that's one thing that
I think he was confused a lot. I think even aside from confidence, I think he was just confused. I think he was flabbergasted at times. Mm-hmm. And what you're seeing from Hubert and Theo, which you're referring to, they're raising the responsibility bar for him.
Absolutely.
A lot of guys, look, this is my game, I can play. And there was a lot of focus during that period where people were saying maybe he's going to leave, and some of the stuff his dad put on Twitter, that, these guys all say, I've got my game. They got to play my game. Every one of them says it. Every kid I've talked to, every program I've ever covered, they at some point will say, I just got to play my game, or something very close to it. Mm-hmm. But what that does, that gets them to understand how their game connects to other guys' games, and that's what makes a team. So encouraging Caleb, they weren't just Caleb plays, they were Caleb to somebody else plays. And I think that raising the bar of responsibility is a part of that process, and Theo totally gets it, because Theo was an unbelievably connected player. He thrived on being connected with other guys. And by the way, when his playing days are over, Theo Pinson's going to be a coach.
Oh, 100%.
Or he's going to be on TV, one or the other. One of my favorite guys I've covered at Carolina, certainly during the Roy Williams era. So I think that's what you get with Caleb. They need more juice from him. They need more vitality. They need Caleb to walk up to someone and smack them on the fanny when they go to the free throw line to huddle before a free throw. They need some more of that from Caleb. And I think this whole offseason is a process of trying to extract that from him. And there's a variety of methods that coaches and older teammates and former players in Theo's case can use to bring that about, because an animated, vibrant Caleb Love, who is fully connected to his teammates and filled with belief in his game, can be a first-team All-ACC guy.
Easily. Easily. I completely agree. I'm interested to see. I'm really interested to see. He's one of the guys I'm kind of looking forward to seeing what kind of strides he makes, because I think, like you said, a fully confident Caleb Love is a big-time player. Let's move on to some of the other guys returning from last year's team. I'm going to group these guys in with three, and then we'll move on to the last two. RJ Davis, obviously Leaky Black, and Kerwin Walton. Those were kind of the next three guys that played the most minutes from last year's team. Obviously, I thought RJ was a guy that we've talked about this for early on in the year, particularly in the Maui Invitational in Asheville. Was a guy that looked better kind of leading the offense at the point guard. I think that kind of switched as the season went on, and we kind of saw RJ's role change a little bit as Roy just tried to stick with Caleb and just kind of force that and see how that goes, because that obviously was his guy and the point guard he wanted out there. But I thought RJ overall, even in that ACC tournament, the Virginia Tech game stands out, where he really performed and has some positive strides. So I think he's a guy that can really continue to improve and be a big-time kind of guard for this team moving forward. Then you add in Leaky Black Sr., a guy that you know what you're getting from Leaky Black. He's not a huge offensive weapon. He had some good games last year offensively at times, but he's not a guy that you're going to rely on to, give you 10, 15 points every night. It's just not going to happen. But defensively, arguably the best defender on this team. At 6'7", 6'8", long guy that you can put at the point guard position if you need to, a guy that's pretty much played, I think, just about every position for the Tar Heels since he's been here. And obviously a guy that with him being a senior, you'd expect to be a big leader on this team. And then Kerwin Walton, a guy that just came on last year out of nowhere, really, and just was the only consistent three-point shooter for the Tar Heels for a majority of the season. I think there's still a lot that he can add to his game. I think there's still a lot of ways he can improve. But when you talk about a guy that can just light it up and shoot, Kerwin Walton's your guy. And I know Carolina released another video as well a couple months ago, or maybe it was a month or so ago, with him hitting like 10 or 20 straight threes in some drill he was doing. So I think that's a great indication of the type of player Kerwin is. And if he can continue to improve, he's just going to get that much better. So focusing on those three guys is kind of the next up. I think that core, especially with RJ and Kerwin, can still really improve. You know what you're kind of getting from Leaky at this point. I think he can still take strides in his game offensively. Now, whether he does that remains to be seen. But I think with those three guys in particular, you've got a nice core there that can do a little bit of different things, and they all kind of provide something different, if that makes sense.
Well, if you need a shooter, Kerwin's your guy. I mean, that's why Kerwin played last year.
Oh, 100%.
Roy found out in Cleveland, in fact, when I was at the game against Kentucky in Cleveland, there were probably no more than 100 people in the buildings. There were no fans allowed. There were only a couple of security, like 2 cops,
just
a couple, people that checked your credentials when you came in.
Mm-hmm.
And there was someone like sweeping the floor or something like that. I remember I had to go in the concourse to do our 3 things video afterward, because it was the first game and UCLA and Ohio State were playing, so I couldn't do it in there. There were 8 members of the media there. So I could hear everything that was going on. Including John Calipari, who had trucker mouth that day. So when Roy put Kerwin in, he hit a couple threes, and the offense was stagnant at times, and he hit a couple threes. And the eruption from the bench when he hit his second 3 wasn't a surprise eruption. It was like, yeah, that's what we see all the time, and now we get to see it in the game finally. And it was the next game, I believe. The next game was NC State. There was a game after that was Georgia Tech when Kerwin was inserted in the starting lineup, but he helped Carolina that day. And you could tell by the reaction from the players that, okay, that's what this guy does. And now we finally got it in the game. Because sometimes, a guy like Roy, if he can't defend, he's not going to play. No matter what else, no matter if you can shoot great. But they were such desperate need for a shooter that Roy went to him. And the rest of his game improved some during the course of the year. He played very well defensively against Louisville, for example, and he really moved more. He had more assists than people. I mean, they didn't have a great assist numbers last year on that team, but he had more than I think some people realized when the season ended. So for his game to improve, those video clips you're talking about, there are others that he put out, working on his dribble, using a dribble to create separation and get a shot, going toward the basket some, moving without the ball, coming off the baseline, popping out, catching, squaring, and shooting, that kind of stuff. He was a little more, I don't know, he was the kind of guy last year that wasn't moving a ton to get open. A lot of his shots came on just basic swing passes and stuff, some kickouts. He's going to get more than this year, but he's worked on so many other elements of his game, and I think you'll see a far more complete player this year. RJ, I agree with you early last year. I think Caleb looked more kind of lost early on in the season. I don't want to say deer in the headlights, but he was just a little overwhelmed. Part of it, I think, was the 2 bigs, and suddenly the game he played in high school was not the game he was going to play at the college level. So RJ appeared less flustered early on, but we saw as the season went on that Caleb's more the playmaker, and RJ didn't have great assist numbers as the year went on. But I also think he managed the game fairly well at times. RJ's certainly someone that could step in and back up Caleb, I think. But he's also a guy that's got a little bit of a motor. He's got some moxie at the 2. He's got some toughness when he plays the 2 or the 1. He could get into the lane and get some buckets. The performance against Virginia Tech in the ACC tournament was huge. That stretch he had in the second half where he said, come on, fellas, ride me. We're going to beat this team. Because they were hell-bent on stopping Bacot. They were hell-bent on stopping Carolina inside. It required RJ to go off the way he did to lift them to the victory there. He played very well in Greensboro at the ACC tournament, had some other really nice stretches. In fact, I think in January, he had a stretch of 5 straight games where he was in double figures against conference teams. So there's a lot there. I think with RJ, just sit back and just let his game evolve. He's got time. I don't think he's in a hurry to get anywhere. And I think you're going to see a guy flare up and have some big games at times. As for Leaky, I think Leaky's game could grow by having his focus and what his responsibilities are narrowed. If they need him to score, 10, 12, 15 points a game, that's not a good thing for this team because he's going to be surrounded by scorers, guys that can put the ball in the basket more than a year ago. Even some of the same guys he was surrounded by a year ago, they're going to be better at putting the ball in the basket. So I don't think you're going to see Leaky taking many possession-saving shots this year like he did a year ago, which affected his shooting percentage. Some of the shots were a very high degree of difficulty, so it made him look bad when it didn't work and it was awkward. So he's going to trim some of that from his game. So it's going to be a more efficient game. But he had a couple double-digit rebound games last year. He can rip and run, either from a make or miss. He can rip and run. He can kick ahead. He sees the floor well. He's a really good pitch-ahead guy who can serve this team very well. He had, 6 games with 5, 6, or 7 assists. Mm-hmm. He did have a few games where he scored, but I wouldn't worry too much about that. Roy says he could be a fantastic defender. We've talked before, Jacob, the job he did in the second half against Buddy Boeheim at home. Leaky can focus more on some of the things that he does really, really well, and he can help this team. A lot of people are down on him, and they think, well, you need 5 guys who can score 20 points a game in the starting lineup. That's not how basketball works. You've got to have the right chemistry. You've got to have the right organization out there. Parts have to work well together. You've seen with Team USA, some of it's played that if you could have all this talent on the floor, but if it's not jiving the right way, then it's not going to – the whole is not going to be as good as all the individual parts if you were to add them up. So Leaky, I think, is a guy that provides that. He could be the glue guy and all that kind of stuff people want to talk about, but I think Leaky's going to be very useful, and I think he's going to have a very solid year.
Yeah, I think, like I said, with all those guys, they provide a little bit something different. And I think what Leaky can do defensively now that he doesn't have to worry about scoring because of the amount of options they have offensively is big time. And RJ and Kerwin, still young guys. You expect them to continue to improve. But I think what we saw from their freshman season last year, I mean, not too much to complain about. I thought they were solid players, and especially
with that group. And with that group, Jacob, you're talking about flexibility.
Oh, yeah.
So, and with the rest of the guys we're going to talk about, the amount of flexibility Hubert's going to have with this roster is considerable, and it's significant. And Roy was criticized a lot for playing the 2 bigs last year, but he didn't have that flexibility.
No.
We saw, Walker Kessler had that drive against Florida State or whoever it was, and everyone went gaga over it. But we saw when he was forced to do other stuff and step away a little bit more, where he struggled at Syracuse. The next game at Syracuse, he really struggled. So Roy really couldn't go small last year. He had to play the way they played. That was their best chance to win. But Hubert's going to have more options this year. And the way those guys can be used situationally, and I think there's going to be a lot of that on this year's team, that makes them better.
Definitely. Let's talk about Anthony Harris and Puff Johnson real quick before we move on to the new guys. Anthony Harris, obviously, probably out of the guys we've talked about so far, played the least. But you talk about that Florida State game, came in, provided a big spark. And I think that's really what Anthony Harris has proven he's good at. He's a guy that comes in, he brings energy, he attacks, he gets after it on the defensive floor. He's not the greatest shooter in the world. He's not the greatest defender in the world. He's super athletic kid. But I think energy-wise and the spark that he can provide off the bench on both sides of the court is huge. And we saw him do that multiple times last year. And even going back to his freshman year before he, hurt his knee and whatnot, we saw it then as well. And then Puff, I know we talked about him in our ISO series, not a ton we can really talk about. I think he's probably the most unknown quantity right now just because we didn't get to see him a lot last year. And when we did get to see him last year early on, it was early in his freshman season, so you're expecting some learning curves anyway. And B, we just didn't get to see a lot of him. He wasn't a guy that was, playing a ton of minutes per game. So I think he's a guy that is a big unknown, but if he's healthy, which he is, and if he can improve and show what he can really do, I think he's a guy that could be a big-time addition to this team when you consider he's already been around the program for a year as well. So with those two guys, I think you've got a nice little mix there and guys that can really make an impact on this year's team and be some big-time role players, if you will.
Well, the unknown factor is there for both of them because Anthony hasn't had an off season until now. Because the first, when he arrived, he was rehabbing. Last year was COVID, and he was still rehabbing, by the way. So he wasn't really doing much at home. So the benefit of him having a full off season in Chapel Hill, a traditional off season in Chapel Hill, we'll really find out what kind of player he is this coming season. And let's also remember we have the benefit of seeing a fairly healthy Anthony Harris over the course of 2 different seasons, even though he'll just be a sophomore this year. I was in Vegas when Roy stuck him in there against UCLA a couple of years ago, and he went for 14 points, actually hit a couple threes in that game, which Roy even joked about afterward.
Yeah.
We may not see a lot of that because he's got, at the time, he had a 3-point shot that wasn't prettiest thing around, but hey, he went through the basket, right? No one ever changed Jamal Wilkes' shot, and I'm dating myself right now by saying that because the ball went through the hoop, right?
Exactly.
But you're right. Anthony gave them vitality then. He was giving them vitality against Yale when he got hurt. Fast forward 13 months, he comes back against Florida State and immediately gave them vitality. Did it against Wake, did it against State, did it in some other games. Actually played pretty well against Wisconsin. I talked about the juice that Armando had in the second half. Anthony had that kind of early on all night in that game for the 10 or 11 minutes that he played. So he is that guy. He could be that. What we've seen so far, not a very good shooter, not a very good ball handler, but he's a willing passer. He's a good baseline guy. And last year's team lacked guys that can move on the baseline comfortably. Mm-hmm. I still think it's an open-ended question about what Anthony Harris's role will be on this team, what he will provide, because we haven't seen him after a full off season yet. So we'll wait and see what mm-hmm. Anthony's doing by the time Christmas comes. He's going to get an opportunity. There's no doubt about that. And he's athletic, and he should be able to be a pretty good defensive player. At times he was last year. Mm-hmm. So we'll have to wait and see. I think if you have a guy like him on your roster, and let's say for the sake of discussion, he's your 11th man, well, you're in pretty good shape. Not that you want to have to go to your 11th man to rely on him for anything, but the fact is, if there is some attrition during the course of the year and his role gets elevated, that's it. That's if it is indeed actually the 11th man when the season starts, mm-hmm. then you're in pretty good shape. As for Puff, small sample size, but I want people to understand this. And I've talked to his dad. I've talked to people that covered him up in Pennsylvania. Everybody that saw him play said he was way, and by the way, his dad didn't say this part right here, but they all said he was way ahead of Cam when Cam got to college. And if you watched the NBA Finals here a few weeks ago, you saw what Cam Johnson
pretty did. Good, yeah.
Okay, you saw how his game just grew and grew and grew. When Cam had 2 offers coming out of high school, Iona and Pitt. And Pitt was a legacy offer because his father played at Pitt, and he's from Moon Township. He's from the area, not far from campus. So Puff was much, much, much more highly regarded. And we didn't really get to see a lot last year. We saw a flash against Charleston. He hit his only 3 of the year. He had a good couple of minutes in a sequence at Iowa. He had that break. He filled in the lane really well. I mean, you point stuff like that out, it's all we really had to grab onto. Mm-hmm. He's a guy that comes from a family which they understand patience. Cam is a great example of it. Cam's making $4.5 million a year. He was patient, and the money came. And I think Puff also understands that if he sticks it out and he's perfect for this system, and I think a lot of people think he's really good for the Hubert Davis vision of what they want to be, that in time he will be ready to be a guy that can contribute. But we got to see more of him. If we have to see more of Anthony Harris, then we got to see a lot more of Puff Johnson. He's only played 50-something minutes in college. But again, if he's your 12th man, there are a lot of programs in America that would love to have that guy as your 12th man. And I'm only saying 12th man because we know the least about him.
Yeah, exactly.
And we don't know where he's going to be in the rotation next year. And even if he doesn't play a lot, think down the road. His brother did, and it paid off.
100%. Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that about Puff, coming out of high school being more highly regarded than Cam is, because Cam turned out to be fantastic. So if Puff can, be 75% of the player Cam is, he's going to have a heck of a career. So, yeah, but still unknown quantities for the most part, and still something we got to just kind of see how those guys continue to develop and what kind of roles they have under Hubert Davis. Now, let's move on to the other guys, the new guys, if you will. Let's start with the 3 transfers, and then we'll end it with the 2 incoming true freshmen. Brady Manick, Dawson Garcia, Justin McCoy. Manick came from Oklahoma, 4-year guy there, streaky shooter, catch and shoot guy, a guy that really had a nice career down there for the Sooners, and I think is a big-time addition for this year's Carolina team in terms of what he brings as a guy that's not only can do some things down low, but is a guy that likes to step out and hit threes at his size. Now, Dawson Garcia, the latest and I guess the last guy that's come in for Hubert Davis, a transfer from Marquette. We've talked about it before, lit up the Tar Heels in Chapel Hill last year in what was, arguably Carolina's worst game of the year. But the year he had as a true freshman at Marquette was super impressive. And we talked about it in his ISO video, but I think his addition, at least for me personally, and I think you kind of said the same thing, made me really feel like, okay, I already knew this team was going to be pretty good and should be pretty good, but the addition of him and what he brings down low in particular makes me a lot more confident about what this team can do in the postseason in particular. And then Justin McCoy, like we mentioned, a guy that transferred in from UVA, local guy, went to Panther Creek. So obviously from the Raleigh-Cary area, had a nice couple of seasons at UVA, saw his role grow a little bit at UVA towards the end last year as well. And I think he's a guy that at 6'7" can kind of do some things and be a versatile guy. And, coming from a UVA program, you expect him to be a guy that can defend too as well when you look at what Tony Bennett likes to do over there. So I think those three additions have really added a lot to this team, and particularly down low with Manek and Garcia. Sharp just got drafted by the Nets in the NBA draft. And then you got a guy like Walker Kessler who transferred to Auburn. I mean, I think we talked about it in those videos as well. I think it was a Garcia video that Carolina might have even upgraded their down low position when you consider the guys that they brought in. And I think they arguably probably fit better into the system that Hubert's trying to build when you look at it. But I think overall, looking at those three guys, if you group them in together, three really good additions that, like I said, kind of similar to RJ Leakey and Kerwin, all kind of provide a little something different.
I'm a big skyline guy. I like looking at skylines.
Mm-hmm.
And, I like to see cities. When I land somewhere and I can see downtown, I like to look at the skyline.
I'm same here. I do.
I'm one of those guys. Okay. Mm-hmm. When Raleigh adds a building every 45 years, it's, hey, the skyline's changed. Nice. So, they've added a few. They got one that's almost finished right now. But the reason I bring this up is to have a great skyline, you've got to have filler. You've got to have the 18-story building, the 16-story hotel. You've got to have the 20-story building, the older buildings that complement the newer stuff. To me, that's what makes a great skyline. Justin McCoy is a guy that fortifies Carolina's skyline, if you will. He's not the 55-story building with the huge sphere on top that lights up at night that people go, wow, look at that building. But he's that 23-floor building, that old hotel with all the brass and steel out front. And, back 75 years ago, I had a guy, escorting people in and out the door. That's kind of what Justin is. Justin's a guy that could provide them some grit. Because like I said, he's the guy that Tony Bennett put in when Jay Huff got in foul trouble last year a lot of the time, and he came through. Think about what Jay Huff was. Justin went in there and he grabbed rebounds. He was a gritty guy and he was an energy guy. He was both of those things, but he also had some skill. He's someone that if you look at most of his baskets last year had an assist attached to him. That means he made himself available and he was ready for the ball. The guys found him. He wasn't just a guy that got it off at the rebound and scored on trash. He was a part of the Virginia offensive flow, and we all know how a premium is put on offensive flow at Virginia on space and recognition, all that stuff. So I think he's going to have opportunities to score at Carolina. He's going to be a guy. I think he's going to be a classic backdoor guy. If you remember the great backdoor guys at Carolina, the Michael Corns of the world, and I'm not saying he's going to be a Michael Corn, but he could step toward the perimeter and then cut to the basket. And I think he's going to get a lot of buckets that way. He's going to be a guy that gives him really good 3-4 minute stints when he gets on the floor. I don't think he's going to play a lot of extended minutes, but that's okay. You need to have guys like that. You need to have that 20-story building that's been around a while, 100%. Fortify your skyline. I think that's what Justin brings them. Brady Manek is sort of that, that functional part of the skyline where it's sort of on the outskirts. And, a lot of times a great skyline, people tend to think it goes straight up in the middle, but really good skylines kind of bounce around. So you 100%. Got Manek as the 40-footer over here. That's like, wow, that's a pretty cool building too. And he's a guy that could catch and shoot like crazy. I mean, watch his video. He's the quickest catch and shoot guy I've seen in a long, long time. And to do that at 6'9" means that his stuff's not getting contested. So if you think about the options this team has with Armando down low, and Armando's better down low than anybody Oklahoma had last year. And sometimes that guy down low was Manek last year, which affected his numbers. He actually played the 5 a lot, too much probably last year. And then whatever Garcia, maybe it's Garcia down there, a guy that can move. And then you got Caleb, and then you got Kerwin. He's going to get so many opportunities to catch and shoot with uncontested stuff where guys aren't denying him the ball that much because they've got to be aware of the drive. They've got to be aware of what else Carolina's doing. And he's also a scoring bunches guy. So there might be some nights where Caleb's off. Armando's in foul trouble. But holy crap, Brady Manek's going off from the perimeter. I mean, guys, he had 6, 7, and 8 threes in games. If you go back and look at his best games in Oklahoma, as a freshman, he had like 8 threes in a game. He scored 29 points in 23 minutes. I believe it was against TCU his freshman season, or it was Oklahoma State's freshman season in the game. Okay, he had performances like that every year at Oklahoma. He had games where, like against Kansas 2 years ago, late in the season. In fact, it was when Oklahoma ended Kansas's run of regular season titles. He scored 17 points like in the first 12 minutes of the game against Kansas, pushed OU out to a big lead that they never let up. I mean, they stepped on Kansas's throat early because that guy is catching and shooting, and then he drags himself down low, and he's got some nice moves around there. He does a good job using his body to gain some separation. He's got a nice little right hand in the lane. So he does that for you. And then Garcia is the building in the middle. Mm-hmm. He's the building in the middle that is multi-use. It's office building, it's condominiums, and down low it's got a great restaurant on the bottom floor. Yeah. And up top it's got an observation deck because he can play down low. He could get down on the block, stick his rear end down, get separation from a guy and score. He goes left a lot because he's left-handed. If he can add a little bit more right to his game, it's really going to raise his stock. He can also step away and shoot from the perimeter. He made 26 threes as a 6'11" guy last year. He could also drive to the basket. A lot of his highlights from last year are driving to the basket. Again, mostly on the left side because he's left-handed. But when you're as long as he is, and he's quick enough, and he's efficient enough with the dribble, he gets a defender on his hip, he's going up and scoring. Okay. And the other thing I like a lot about Garcia, and this was a problem with Carolina last year, A, he shoots free throws really well. B, he shoots a lot of them. Mm-hmm. Shoots a lot of free throws. If you look at his best games last year, he was going to the line a lot. Mm-hmm. So he's drawing other teams' bigs in foul trouble. He creates problems for other teams. And defensively, if you look at the job he did against Carolina, Garrison was the only Carolina big that played well that night. And he had to step away and do a lot of his stuff. And a lot of the time, Garcia wasn't on him. He really confused Armando, caused him to make have a few mistakes, a couple turnovers. And I think his presence was felt on both ends of the floor. So those guys, along with Armando, fortify a pretty nice skyline. Carolina's got a lot of pretty much what you need. If you go downtown and whatever it is you're looking for, this group could provide it for you.
Yeah, I love that analogy. That was fantastic, AJ. A+ right there for me.
I didn't overdo it with it, did I?
No, that was fantastic. It feels like if I'm holding up a score, that's a 10 out of 10, man. That was fantastic.
In honor of the Olympic time.
Yeah, exactly. That's where it came from. So yeah,
that's the only 10 I'll ever get in my life. Trust me. And that's just because I pay you. So
yeah, I love it. No, I thought it was fantastic, man. Let's move on to the last two guys I want to talk about. Two incoming freshmen. Now, for those who don't know or probably do know, we didn't do videos on those guys coming in. We focused on the ISO videos that we did do, or the guys that transferred in and the returning players. But DeMarco Dunn, he's a guy I saw down in Myrtle Beach last year. I believe it was at the Beach Bash, and loved him for the minute I saw it. Love his game. All around really good. And he does it all with this kind of poker face. I mean, in the two games I saw him play, I don't think he really ever changed emotion at all. He got it done on the defensive side of the floor. Had a few steals in the second game I saw that was really impressive, just getting it out in transition and finishing. But he was also a guy that offensively was running the point in a lot of times, and not only could facilitate the rock and set up his teammates, but was also a guy that could just kind of score from all over the place, shoot threes, get in the lane. Mid-range was nice. So I was really, really impressed with what I saw from DeMarco Dunn. And when I was finally able to see him in person last year, I was like, okay, yeah, I know why a program like Carolina is so high after this guy, because he's just a super impressive all-around player on both ends of the court, in my opinion. And then got Dontrez Styles again, another guy from Kinston. I know Carolina's had a long, lengthy history with guys from Kinston. Reggie Bullock pops to mind as one of the more recent guys. But I haven't seen Styles. I would love to have seen him in person. I haven't got to see him yet. But from all accounts and what I've seen online from him and watching videos, a guy that can get to the rim, a guy that can grab boards, a guy that can score a little bit as well. And I like what he does on the offensive and defensive side of the floor. I think he's a guy that I'm really looking forward to seeing what kind of player he is in a couple years as well, because I think he can improve a lot and can really do a lot of things on both ends of the court, like I mentioned, for the Tar Heels. So I think with Styles and Dunn, two good additions. It's been a class that really hasn't gotten talked about a lot. I've talked with a few Carolina fans about that, is you kind of forget about the guys coming in because of the regime change with Hubert coming in. Obviously that was huge. And then with the 3 transfers coming in, these are kind of guys that have gone under the radar a little bit. And I guess because they're not some McDonald's All-Americans walking around like we've become accustomed to, but make no mistakes, Dontrez Styles, DeMarco Dunn, 2 really good players, and 2 players that I expect to have some kind of role on next year's team, because I really, really like what I've seen from both those guys coming out of high school.
Also from Kinston is Mr. Stackhouse.
Yep, Jerry Stackhouse as well. Yep.
Everyone knows what I'm talking about. Let me start with DeMarco, and I'm glad you brought up the point guard thing when you saw him down there. You know, he played point guard for Garner Road because he wanted to, because he wanted that responsibility. He wanted to spend the limited AAU season last year, 2020, the COVID year, running the point and elevating that part of his game. And I think that says a lot about the kind of player that he is, because he's very self-aware from what I understand. He's a kid that understands his strengths, understands what needs to be worked on even more, understands what part of his game, you know, there's nothing to it. So he has to really, so he's put in the effort to more fortify his whole game. And I think that that's something that when you get to the college level, man, you can't be a one-trick pony anymore basketball. You turn on the TV and watch the game in the Olympics, you watch an NBA playoff game, and quite frankly, you watch what Baylor did. You cannot be a one-trick pony and be successful basketball anymore. You have to have a lot of well-roundedness to your game. So clearly, he had that in mind. From what everything I understand, he's a knockdown shooter. He's a guy that, as Dickie V would say, he likes to tickle the twine or twinkle the toe twine, or whatever the hell Dickie
that's
said.
A Dickie V reference.
Yeah, he's a guy that when he swishes the ball from 22 feet, the bottom of the net kicks up. Yeah. And if you were to go slow-mo, it would rise just above the rim level and then drop back down. My understanding is DeMarco does that quite a bit. But I don't know what his role is going to be on this year's team. If he can shoot, there's going to be a place for him to get 100%. Minutes. And I think he's going to play early. And then how other guys play and based on how he plays will determine how much more he plays as the season goes on. I think given the fact that this team didn't shoot well last year, there's opportunity for him. Yeah, they brought in Brady Manick, but you know Brady's a 35% three-point shooter in his career, or 36% three-point shooter in his career. Actually 37.5, excuse me. He was a little lower last year, but again, like I said, he was playing a 5 some last year. I don't think he was super comfortable with last year's team. Other than that, you know, in Kerwin, you still need more shooters. You need a guy that can put the ball in the basket. Hubert wants to score a lot of points. You need a guy that can catch and shoot and transition. And from what I've seen from DeMarco, and you saw it in person, he's capable of catching and shooting in transition. With Dontrez, all the reports that I've read that are public and some of the things that I'm hearing, you know, behind the curtain, he's had a phenomenal summer, really, really good summer. I think that people sort of had a vision of him being like a small big, like a Justin McCoy type. Where he's a guy that will play on the block and he's kind of undersized, but he's gritty and all that kind of stuff. Everything I'm hearing is it's all skill. Yeah. He's athletic. He's skilled. He could shoot from the perimeter. He could put the ball on the floor from the wing, 2 dribbles, pull up and shoot over a guy from 14 feet. I'm hearing all those things. I haven't seen it, but that's what I'm hearing. I think that these 2 guys, Carolina fans that are maybe say, well, they're not McDonald's All-Americans, so we'll wait and see. Get used to it, because Hubert's going to bring a lot of these guys in the program. They both committed to Roy, but obviously they recommitted to Hubert. They knew what they were getting into, and I think Hubert wants to have these types of dudes in the program because they're not going to come in and be gone before you know it, and you forget what they look like 10 years later. They're going to be around for a couple of years. They're going to have an opportunity to grow into the program, and I think both these guys absolutely fit the vision that Hubert has moving forward. So they'll have an opportunity early to play. We'll see what they look like. They'll have an opportunity to be in the rotation when that's whittled down late in the year, and we'll see. But I think they're both going to have nice Carolina careers, and they're not going to be able to walk away and say they didn't get a shot, because they're both going to get a chance to become the players they can become.
Definitely. Love it, AJ. So overall, before we wrap this thing up, pretty good looking team on paper, right?
Well, I think that when they got Garcia, Final Four talk isn't crazy talk. I mean, I'm not saying they're going to be a Final Four team, because there's so much that has to come together. And when you go into a season saying, well, they need A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and all that kind of stuff to happen in order to be a Final Four team, I mean, no team ever checks every box. No. The 2009 Tar Heels checked every box. The 2012 Tar Heels checked every box until Kemba got hurt, but very few teams do. And this club ain't 09 and ain't 12. But if Caleb's better at taking care of the ball and shoots better from the perimeter, and he was at 31.3% last year after his terrible start the first month of the season. Not that that's good, but I think that's more of an indication of where this is actually starting. He must improve on 31.3%. RJ We know what he can do. I think Kerwin needs to be a guy that can put the ball in the basket. He needs to be consistent. Maddox's going to be what I said he's going to be. Garcia must be a consistent contributor to this team. Bacot must be first team all ACC. If he is, and Caleb's first team all ACC, and Garcia's third team all ACC, and Kerwin's a guy that's honorable mention all ACC, and Maddox honorable mention, and Leakey's a really good role player, and you don't see people complaining about him on social media, I think this team has a chance to be really, really good and be a Final Four team. And there's still those other parts that we could throw into it as well. I think the toughest thing for Hubert is going to be, how he weighs seeing a lot of guys and getting the kind of chemistry he needs to push forward when they get to February, because there's so much newness. If this was Roy's team, I think that process would be quicker because Roy's done it so many times, and because he kind of knows, would have a much better idea what it's going to look like when they get through their weighing process, the chemistry process of mixing all these different potions together. Mm-hmm. For Hubert, it might take a little bit longer, and because it's his first time, and because he's not really sure what the end product is going to look like. Roy always has a much better idea what it's going to look like, because that's why he's Roy. Yeah. Hubert needs time to do that. So that's the other factor here. Hubert, it's his first year. It's his first time doing this. So I think on paper, this is a Final Four caliber team. We'll see if they come together and become that. They're also obviously an ACC contender. I think that they have a chance to win the league. It'd be pretty cool if Hubert could put up a banner of some kind his first year. They certainly have on paper the kind of team that can do that.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. To be determined how good this team is. But like I said, like you said, on paper, looks pretty good. If you're a Carolina fan, a lot of reasons to be excited. But yeah, it's just a great place to wrap this one up. Hope you guys have enjoyed the UNC basketball ISO series that we've been running out since the first week of May. Not only the videos, but the look ahead series and the other 2 content pieces AJ had run on all the 10 players as well. So if you haven't seen those, like I said, you can link below to our website, TarHeelIllustrated.com, and you can click our YouTube channel below and you can find a playlist with all our UNC basketball and UNC football ISO videos that we've been doing all summer. Really fun series, and hope that everybody that's seen it has enjoyed following along with us. But yeah, it's new era in Carolina basketball and a lot of reasons to be excited. I've been Jacob Turner. He's been Andrew Jones. As always, guys, you know what to do. Like, share, subscribe, hit that notification bell as well so you get a notification every single time we upload a video, and we'll see you guys in the next one.
Thanks.